I am Herman Fauntleroy, and today I'm interviewing Mr. Edward B. Farley, who is a Petersburger, member of a family that has some real history in the city of Petersburg. Mr. Farley is a veteran from World War II in particular, and the Korean War, but he was a member of the armed forces that invaded Omaha Beach and had quite a time in terms of being a part of that. Mr. Farley, in terms of your recollection of the segregated Petersburg, what is your opinion in reference to the difference that you see today as related to what was then?
Well, I see so vast differences. Sometimes it boggles the mind. Being 82 years old, I lived through so many changes. And I recall I was raised on the Avenue. And during that time, the Avenue was the commercial center for black businessmen. And when I go down there now, I feel like crying sometimes. Because when I went on the Avenue in 1933, all the people now that were on the Avenue in 1933, all of them gone. The last one to go was a fellow by the name of, we call him Peter Pie. He worked in Bob Lee's shoe shop. But going back to your question, everything has changed. The whole culture has changed, seemingly. And there's a different way of living now, different set of values. And I don't want to criticize anybody at all. I go through the neighborhoods, I see the vast changes. I come up on this campus for the first time in a long time, see all these new buildings up here I've never seen before. Some of these buildings are named after some of my teachers. I mean, one of the buildings now was named after the wife of one of my teachers, Dr. Harry. So Petersburg, back in the 30s, living in a segregated area, a segregated time, the blacks kept to themselves and the whites kept to themselves, of course. And you wouldn't find any whites living in black neighborhoods and vice versa. One here was all white. That was off limit after 7 o'clock. And the only people you saw coming out the houses were workers, the maids, the butlers, the chauffeurs. But now all that changed now. The city now really integrated in all phases. Housing, neighborhoods integrated, schools integrated. My mind go back to the old 5 and 10 cent store, Sycamore Street. That's all gone now. But I remember the time you could go in there to buy things, but you couldn't sit at the counter eating the food. You could order it, stand up, and then take it out. So when I ride down Sycamore Street, I see all the old buildings now, some of them vacant. And years ago, they were all filled up with clothing stores, confectionery stores. And I think of one in the Blacker Brothers. I think of the Globe. There used to be a clothing store way downtown by the name of Solomon Clothing Store. Then at one time, there were 3 theaters down there. I know one was called the Century. And the Century Theater, the whites sit downstairs and the black would sit up in the balcony. The other 2 theaters, black were not allowed to go to them at all. So it's a vast change. And comparing, if I use the word progress, we have made progress. We have made tremendous progress. But we got so much more progress to make. The job is not finished, not at all. But Petersburg is a beautiful city. And when I go through the various neighborhoods, my mind goes back in time to the people that live in various houses. They're all gone now. All of them gone.
You mentioned the avenue and that area. In fact, that whole area that included South Avenue, if you will. Your family had businesses in that area, didn't they?
Yep. I came down on the avenue in 1933, or either 32, one of those years. And my father had a pool room. And he and I lived on top of the pool room. And he had the pool room in the back, and he had what they call a confectionery store at the front, where you sold candy, pies, and milkshakes. Then later on, he converted. When I went to the army, no, when I went to school, I went away to school, a place called City of Petersburg. And when I came back in 1943, he got rid of the pool room and put a pool up the street, and he converted the pool room where it was into a restaurant. And he ran that for quite a number of years until he died. But since you mentioned that avenue and all this business, there were so many businesses, and I think of so many names. Miss Virgil Sparks down in Wilkerson, a lady by the name of Miss Lottie. Miss Lottie had a small restaurant beside the Wilkerson. Then they had Johnny Morgan barber shop. Then they had Snap Thompson. Snap Thompson was an old man. He had a shoe shop. That's where Bob Lee worked. That's where he got his first job. Snap Thompson taught him how to fix shoes. And then later on, Tater Pie came in there. This during the late 30s and the early 40s. Then I remember Dr. Darden, and there was a dentist in that same building. I try and think of his name, but I can't think of it right away. Then there was a funeral home on the avenue. There were two funeral homes. One was Wilkerson, the one I just indicated, and there was a funeral home. I can't think of that man's name, but he wasn't there too long. I wish I could think of it. But just so, since I'm thinking about it, this man who owned the pool room, the funeral home, his son and I was in World War II together, up in a place called Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And he knew my whole family. And I remember one time he took me to New York because they had moved. And I went and met his mother and his sisters there in New York City. I wish I could remember the name now, but I can't. Then Mr. Hurt, he first came down there, opened up a confectionery store near my daddy's restaurant. And then he was a very remarkable man, Mr. Hurt. Very intelligent, very well formed. He may have certain peculiarities, but we all have them. Then later on, he moved up the street near the pool room that my daddy moved up the street that I ran. And I'm trying to think of some more. Then I remember Ann's Beauty Parlor. Miss Ann had a beautiful beauty parlor in the Mutual Building. That torn down now. The Mutual Building had about 3 floors on it. And Dr. Shields had an office there, and Dr. Williams had an office there. And the top floor, it was a North Carolina insurance company. I remember that very, very well. And of course, there was some more barber shops up the street. And got to put in place the time. Then there were a few small buildings that were, we call them dice houses. People would play dice. They were gamblers' places. The gamblers hang out there. They played cards and they played dice. I look back at all those people there, I think about them because they were so nice to me. I was the only little boy living on that street during that time. I didn't have any playmates on that street. And later on, a fellow by the name of Lewis, Commodore Lewis. Commodore Lewis was a barber. He had a son named Benny Lewis. Benny just turned 80 years old a couple of months ago, and he would come down to see his father. And then at that time, we became friends, and we still remain friends to this day. I go see him every week, and he's still the same fellow. He's very tall. He's a very handsome boy, but he lived by himself, of course. And his mama passed away. His mother lived to be 90 years old, and she passed away a few years ago. So Benny lived by himself now.
If you compare the Avenue area, which, as you've indicated, was full of black businesses at that time, and as I recall, I think there was a market there.
But got that part.
But in comparing that to Sycamore Street, which was segregated, what would you say about the black businesses in terms of their operation and the number of black businesses, and whether or not it was an area that was quite productive?
They were very productive. On the avenue, all the business flourishes. My daddy's restaurant, oh boy, especially on weekends. And you mentioned the market, across the street from my daddy's place. The farmers would come in on Saturday and set up that booth. I remember you could rent a booth for 15 cents and get a permit. And farmers from Dinwiddie, Chesterfield, and Prince George would come in there. And I look back in time, I can look up from my window, because I live on the second floor. I could look up from my window at 5 o'clock on Saturday morning and see the farmers coming in with horse-drawn wagons. Very few farmers had cars. If you had a car, you were very prosperous. But most of them had mules and wagons. And I met many of them. And going back on the other side of the avenue, I recall an event, and you don't see that nowadays. Halloween was a big day in Petersburg, a big day. Around about 6 o'clock, they were shut off South Avenue. No cars were allowed on South Avenue. And by 8 o'clock, you see 400 or 500 people coming down there, celebrating Halloween. The people dressed in all their Halloween regalia, and it was magnificent. Oh, it was joyous. But that's been gone. That's been gone.
You indicated that you attended St. Emma Military Academy. Were you in elementary school in Petersburg?
No, I left. Well, I don't mind saying it now. When I was small, I went to old folk called the Little Devil, using that term. And I was mischievous. And really, I didn't start really paying any attention to school until I was in the 8th grade. They had no 9th grade then, I don't think. And I had some wonderful teachers, but I didn't respond too well to what they tried to teach me. It wasn't until I got into first year of high school that a man by the name of Mr. Samuel Griffin taught science. And I don't know why, but that was the first subject that I liked. And that's when I first started studying science. I loved science. And later on, Mr. Griffin had a great part in my life. He was the one that told my father to take me out of the public school and put me in a private school. Because growing up on the avenue, and I was entering my teens, that would be the best environment for me, which was a very, very wise decision. and I'm so thankful for that. But going to cinema was a brand new world for me, a beautiful world, a wonderful world. And I loved it. I was never homesick. Because then I went into a religious community. Plus it was a military school where I learned discipline, which I needed very, very, very badly. And I stayed there until I went to the Army. And at cinema, you would stay there 9 months. I only come home in the summertime. But I loved it. It was just like one big, beautiful family. We had all priests for teachers and a few black instructors. We had a trade building. The first year I took up electricity. The second year I took up bricklaying. And I look back now, I wonder how in the world I got into bricklaying, pushing a wheelbarrow full of mortar. But it was beautiful when I look back in time. Really wonderful. And the cinema really changed my life. It gave me a different focus on life. It gave me value that I didn't have. Even today, I still have some of those values. And since you mentioned cinema, coincidentally, 2 weeks ago, a young man called me from Richmond by the name of Roberts. And he identified himself. And he was in the class of 1963. Because I left cinema in 1943. And he wrote a book about cinema. And he sent it to me. And Lord, when I opened that, saw that book, I felt like crying. That book he did some wonderful research on cinema from the time it was instituted until 1963. And I still have that book at home now. Plus, since you mentioned cinema, I met some wonderful friends there. And one boy by the name of William Clark. We remained friends until he died. Clark came from Lexington, Virginia. He was a very smart boy, wonderful mind. And he went to the Army, he went to the Pacific, and we kept contact. And when he came with the Army, he finished college, and then, ironically, Clark went back to cinema as a coach. And I used to visit him there. And he met a young girl who lived in a place called Belle Mead that was near St. Emma. And he married her. And I was the best man at the wedding. Then a few years later, Clark moved to Williamstown, Massachusetts, where he became principal of school there. And then later on, he became superintendent in Williamstown. And when he retired, he and his wife came to my house and stayed about 5 days. And this is very emotional. I went to North Carolina to visit, and I was away for about 4 days. When I came back, Clark had died and buried. And his wife, she died a year later up in Williamstown, Massachusetts. When I was married and had 3 children, way before he died, when he was working up there, before he retired, we went to visit Clark. Stayed a whole week up there with him. I miss him. Oh, I miss him.
You spent several years in the Army, I know. And of course, you were there during World War II. And as I indicated when we first began, you were a part of the invasion. And participated in the Omaha Beach situation. When you returned to Petersburg, and having been in the Army during the time that you were there, and at that point in time the Army was segregated also. How did you envision Petersburg from what you left when you went into the Army?
Well, when I came back, it was so surprising. When I left Petersburg, there was a train station in Ettrick, the first one, first building. I'll never forget when I got on the train and came down to Petersburg, and the conductor said Petersburg, like they haul the names of places and all. I looked out the window and saw a building that I had never recognized. And I said, this is not Petersburg. So the conductor said, yes, it is. You better help him get off. I said, you sure it's Petersburg? He said, sure. So when I got off the train, I didn't recognize the building at all because that was put there during the war. And the first old building, they closed that down. And the only time I realized I was in Petersburg when I saw the cab stand, when I saw the cabs out there. The cab would come to pick up the passengers. When I saw Richardson Cab Company and Manhattan Cab Company, that's when I knew it was Petersburg. And it was nighttime. And my father didn't know when I was coming in. He didn't know it. I got on the Avenue around 11:30. And when I saw my father for the first time, we hugged and he cried, and I cried, because both of us were so happy. Then the next day I found out that a lot of the people there whom I knew, some of them had died. My father still had the pool room, and up the street he had the, he still had the restaurant. Up the street he had the pool room. And the avenue was still the same, because that was still segregation. The market was still there. And my daddy gave me the pool to run. So I ran the pool for a number of years. I ran the pool for about 35 or 40 years. Way past when he died. But times didn't change, as we all know, until 1954. And it's very ironic when they passed down this Supreme Court decision of the Brown case. That was I think in May of 54. And my first child was born on April the 15th of 1954. Now she's 52 years old now. She'll be 53 this coming April. And that's when things didn't change overnight now. It took a long time to change. The school didn't integrate right away. Not at all. Then I went to college. And I got married. That was after I came into the Korean War. I went back to the Korean War in 1950. But I only stayed there 9 months. And when I came out, I got married. Then I got my life together. My mind was much more stable. And then I came up here and finished college. And then time began to change very gradually. I first started working, and I worked there for 31 years in Dinwoody. And that was still segregated. I think Dinwoody didn't integrate until about 1970. So for about 12 years it was still segregated when I went there. And that was a joyous experience for me when I worked for 31 years in Dinwoody being a school teacher. And to look back in time and to really laugh, and I look at it in such a jolly way. Very few people in Petersburg thought that I would ever even go to college. Not less than finish. And on top of that, to be a school teacher. I think of an old school teacher whom I knew so well, was very well known, Miss Roberts. And I'll never forget when I first got my job teaching, I used to go to visit her. And I think for her, she knew my whole family because I was born on Lookout Street. And I'll never forget her when I walked in the door and we were in the kitchen to sit down. She looked at me and shook her head. She said, "I don't believe it." She said, "I don't believe it. You a school teacher. I don't believe it." She said, "I hope before I die that I will come out there and visit you in the classroom." But that never did happen.
You think you might want to take a break?
Yeah, I think I need a break.
Okay. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and talk some more.
All right.
Okay?
Take a break.
When you came back from the Army, of course, and as we said, segregation was still rampant. Then, about 1960, things began to change somewhat in Petersburg in terms of the picketing and the sit-ins, and schools, of course, were, as you indicated, were still segregated. What's your opinion in terms of how that period of time might have affected Petersburg?
Well, looking back, I think it affected Petersburg in a very positive way. I remember when they first started. I'll never forget the name of a man by the name of James Mayfield.
Mm-hmm.
He really started the movement. Mm-hmm. He and a fellow by the name of Mr. Gunther. Mm-hmm. Mr. Gunther worked on the campus of Penn State College. And I remember they started with a small core of children. They would meet in front of Hurt confectionery store, and that was next door to my pool room. And Mayfield started the movement. He started going to the 5 and 10 cent stores, sit-ins, and there was only one incident of violence, just one incident. There was a confrontation that Mayfield had with a white person, and Mayfield was arrested. And this was a very historic event. I'll never forget that day. We went to the courthouse. Oh, it was packed, right on Bank Street, the old courthouse. It was really packed. And what happened in that courtroom was really history. It was history. At that time, I don't know whether it was the SCLA or the NAACP, but one of the organizations sent down a lawyer. I'll never forget his name. He was a short fellow. His name was Lynn Hope. And Lynn Hope magnified that courtroom. I compare him to Charles Clarence Darwin. He was really a black Clarence Darwin. I never in my life seen a man articulate himself in a courtroom the way he did. He summoned the entire city council to testify, which were all white. And when he would ask them questions, it was astounding. And the prosecutor kept objecting. And Lynn Hope would rattle off certain cases verbatim without any notes to support his arguments. He was magnificent. I compared him to Clarence Dowell. And at one point, the prosecutor kept objecting. And I'll never forget the judge. He stopped the prosecutor at one point and said, listen, stop objecting. That don't need now. Because Lynn would support his cases by previous cases, verbatim. And of course, they found him not guilty. But that scene, that was a place in history. And I think about Lynn Holt now. I wonder where he is. But he had a brilliant mind. I mean, everybody applauded him. Even the judge respected him, his knowledge of law, and the way he matriculated in that courtroom. It was a scene from Clarence Dowell scope case. I compared to that in Tennessee. I really do. Because this may be very, very not relevant, but there was a Broadway show in New York, and I saw it advertised in the paper called Inherit the Wind. And it was about Clarence Dowell and the Scope Cave. So I got on the train and went up there just to see that performer. And Paul Mooney, which very, very young people know now. Paul Mooney was a very, very famous movie star during the 20s and the 30s. And that was my first live play I ever seen in my life. And that was magnificent. And I had seen 2 or 3 other plays by Inherit the Wind. And the last one I saw, and this was very, very ironical, and I'd say historical too. They had a play at the Landmark Theater in Richmond some years back, Inherit the Wind. And the person who represented Clarence Dowell in that play was a black man. And that was something. Because during the intermission, I was talking to him, and I was talking to the producer, and I mentioned to the producer about the first play I saw in New York with Paul Mooney. And he took me to come here, I got something to show you. He took me in his office, and up on the wall, he had the old movie picture of Paul Mooney playing the role of Clarence Dowell in Inherit the Wind. But it was very, very ironic that this time he selected a black man to play the role of Clarence Dowell. And he was very good. Very good.
You mentioned James Mayfield and the fact that he was quite instrumental in causing the movement to really, really get started in Petersburg. The court case that Lynn Holt was involved in, and others in Petersburg, because he really supported the Petersburg movement quite well. Holt, that is, I think, caused the movement in Petersburg to really, really gain some ground. Do you think that that particular situation may have caused some changes to begin to take place in terms of the whole segregated environment here in Petersburg?
I think that case initiated some very, very important changes. Now, I must make a statement and give the white people credit, if I call that credit. I call that credit. That was the only incident of violence. There was no more violence at all. They still continued their fight for rights. They still demonstrated. And two other names come to my mind, Carl Winfield and something of Carl Winfield and George Well. He was also instrumental in that. But the movement began to escalate at a much fast pace. And they had a few incidents when Y.T. Walker came in, when he came to preach at Gifford. He joined the movement. I remember the time where he was arrested to integrate the library. I remember that particular incident. And I have a document there from Y.T. when he was the president of the organization. And I contributed some money to it. And he wrote me a thank you note. And I got it in this envelope. And I keep it and cherish it. Y.T. He was a magnificent man when he came in. He was a very, very unusual minister. And when I say unusual, he mingled with the people on the avenue. And he was the only pastor to do that. He came to my pool room very, very often and associated with the boys on the avenue. And that really was an uplifting to their dignity, that a preacher will come to a pool room and play pool and communicate with the people in the pool room. Because by custom during that time, that was a little class reaction concerning people on the avenue. I knew, looking back in time, a lot of young people, they weren't allowed to come on the avenue. When I say that, young people, like 15 or 16, 17, 18 years old, if you did come on the avenue, you would go to the doctor's office or go to O.P. Hair, and you heard them leave the avenue. A certain class did not ever associate with the people on the avenue. And I look back there and smile, because that was the time. But Y.T., he really integrated the avenue socially, and he got such tremendous respect. And that's why he had such a great following. Y.T. was magnificent. He really was. Down to earth. Could communicate with the people. And at that time, that was much needed, very much needed.
Well, as a leader in Petersburg, how do you think he affected the change that took place?
How he expected the change? Well, Y.T. was came from the North. He was a young fella. And the activity began to increase. He got arrested for integrating the library. Then later on, the schools became integrated. I remember Dr. Noyes, when they filed a petition to integrate the college out there, community college in William & Mary. When they first petitioned to integrate it, they entered my daughter's name and Dr. Noyes' daughter's name as a litigant. I remember that. So things began moving fairly fast, I said. Not fast now, fairly fast. And I must reiterate, there was very, very little violence Very, very little about it, if any. That's why I give the white people some credit. But it wasn't easy. Because I remember when they proceeded to integrate Wilcox Lake. Wilcox Lake was a public-owned lake, which is well known during those times. But that was segregated. Only white went there. And my brother was one of the participants, Richard Farley. He was one of the participants in boycotting Wilcox Lake. And I look at it and smile. No need to crying all the time. Wilcox Lake closed up and never did open again. Whenever I pass by there now, I think about my brother. I'm all right now.
Wilcox Lake was closed rather than permit blacks to use it.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And as you indicated, never did open again. You indicated that you went to, after graduating from Virginia State, you began your teaching career in Dinwiddie, which was still segregated.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. When Dinwiddie school system was integrated, and obviously had some impact on Petersburg, how was that accepted there?
I said this for Dinwiddie. It was the most beautiful integration I ever seen. I remember we had a superintendent there. I can't recall his name. Well, he was from South Carolina. He was a wonderful man. Beautiful leadership. And I remember the first day of school when they integrated. It was magnificent. No type of confrontation at all. The black children and the white children, I remember the first class when they came in. Naturally, some were very hesitant of sitting near the black and vice versa. But it wasn't too obvious. The children were really, looking back now, they were a little bit frightened, the black and the white. But they treated each other very, very friendly. They would smile. They were very nice. And I give that credit to the superintendent, because we had a lot of orientation with him, with the white teachers and the black teachers. And they got along very well, the white teachers and the black teachers. It was a beautiful integration in Dinwiddie. I don't know what Petersburg schools were, but because I wasn't in Petersburg school. But Dinwiddie, to me, demand a high honor the way they integrated. And when I worked there afterwards, there were no racial confrontation. Not one. And that was beautiful.
Did your daughter and sons attend Petersburg public schools?
Well, my family was Catholic.
Yeah.
And they attended the private schools, St. Joseph.
Okay.
But then later on, my oldest daughter, when she became a senior, she wanted to go to all black school. And it was all black then. And she convinced us, her mother and me, that she wanted to go to the other school. And at that time, I had 4 children in that Catholic school. So I bowed my head and relented. So they left. They left the Catholic school, and all of them finished the public school. And at that time, of course, the school was a new school on Johnson Road then. So they went there. You know.
How do you view Petersburg today?
Well, looking back, there were a lot of positives, many positive things, a lot of advancement, a lot of progress. And the only thing I feel sorry for, and I'm not going to the blame game, I feel sorry for the children. I feel so sorry for them. Because the crime rate is so high. Family dysfunction is so high. One-parent family. And I see the children on the corners now. Sometimes I communicate with them because I knew some of their fathers and mothers. And I feel sorry for those kids. I really feel sorry for them. I have visited some of them in jails. I knew some of them who have been killed. And that's the only negative thing I think about when I think of Petersburg. And of course, being a school teacher, I look at the educational factor, which can be much better than what it is. But we live in a society where things are interrelated. One thing can affect another. And there's no one cause. There are multiple causes. And I don't want to... The blame game is... There's no need of playing the blame game. That's not a positive thing at all. We just got to do a lot of reconstruction in our homes, in our neighborhood, in our schools. We got to help those children. Because when they first integrated, they weren't that way at all. During the 60s, there wasn't as much crime in the city as it is now. So somebody got to find a solution. But my heart still goes out to the children. I feel so sorry for them. Because I do not believe, and I know a few of them, they do not enjoy doing what they're doing. But they tell me many times, what else can I do? They don't see the alternatives. And that's what we have to teach them, that there are alternatives. You don't have to do what you're doing now. There's hope, as Reverend Jackson used to say. There's hope. But we got to do something that is concrete, something that the children will understand, something that they will comprehend, to change the way they're living. So that's the way I look at it.
Well, Mr. Farley, I certainly appreciate you taking the time today to come and talk with us and be a part of the situation that will become history, if you will, in terms of the types of discussions that we have, not only with you, but with other persons also. Something that we can file away, if you will, in terms of our library, and hopefully some of the young people that you're talking about may want to go take a look and listen and look at people like you. So we're going to continue to work in that direction. But certainly, I personally appreciate your coming, because I know you, and I know everything that you've said. You mean it, and I knew you, or have known you for quite some time. So thanks a lot for being here. And we'll continue to work, and we may be in touch with you again to talk some more, because you are history.
Well, and if I may add on these words, I've been knowing you ever since you were a little boy. And nowadays, old folks don't look at things and use the word, is it proper to say certain things or not proper. But at my age now, I really don't care. I remember some type of award was given to somebody in the city of Petersburg for civil rights. Maybe you have forgotten it, but I haven't. I call you up, and I mentioned to you the fact that why they do not honor you. And you did tell me that you were honored at some event, but I was very disturbed because you were also in that movement. I remember when you came into the movement, and you're still in the movement. You haven't changed. And you belong in that same team along with Mayfield and Gunther and George Webb. You belong on that same team. And I remember when I went to Mr. Blaine, Nelson Blaine Sr., I wrote it down so I won't forget it. A leader by the name of Cassie Walker, Herbert Colton, and Clyde Johnson. We went to Reverend Dr. King's funeral. First time I ever been to Atlanta, Georgia. And that was a very unforgettable, historic event. And the only person I saw that was not from Petersburg was a fellow by the name of John Edmonds. I met him on the street. And John, of course, had passed on. I'll never forget that event. And since that time when I came back, and years later, when my children grew up, left school, even before they left school, I used to say to them, I said, when you grow up, the South going to be an economic mecca. Years ago, all blacks went north. Now that was history. I said, the economic mecca now going to be the South. The South going to improve. Now go south for economic endeavor. And today, one of my sons lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He is the president of his own company. And he's doing wonderfully well. And I go down there often to see him. And of course, whoever thought that I would ever go to Atlanta, Georgia. And one more item, so many things come to old folks' mind. And it relates to this college. I knew a man by the name of Mr. Singleton. They have a building named after him. Mr. Singleton was the head of the Commerce Department. And Mr. Singleton was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I remember that. That's all I want to say.
Well, again, thank you very much, and you've closed this session for us, I think, in a very productive and wonderful way. Thanks again.
It's been my honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, they click it off.